Thank you so much, Marcelo. I had the opportunity of reading in deep your paper. It's very inspiring and very touching. I like to raise two comments regarding Latin America, especially Central America, and has to do with the digital revolution and the digital divide and the digital opportunities that the technologies are having on this regard. The first one is the remittances. It's important to find more flexible ways to facilitate the sending of remittances, which in some countries represent up to 15% of the GDP. And the World Bank has been making some research that shows that the impact of remittances under the economy of the families is very high and even is a way of invigorating the economies mainly in Central America. My point has to do with the new technologies associated with remittances and the case of El Salvador, where the level of the payments that the family have to do with the remittances is slowing due to the use of cryptocurrencies. So, remittances, cryptocurrencies are showing us a paradox about the different impact of the technology in the life of the families and in the life of the country's economies itself. The second comment has to do with teleworking. Teleworking and education and the digital education could be another opportunity in order to shorten the distance between families and an opportunity of having at home the possibility of working through the digital economy. So, the digital alphabetization is of the utmost importance in order to avoid the split of the division of the families mainly in Central America. In my opinion, the coders are the industrial workers of this post-industrial era. So the connectivity is one of the main important things that the government could launch in order to avoid all these problems. And the third point, and that's a question for you, Marcelo, has to do with drug addiction. You have mentioned many problems that the children are facing because of the split and the division of the families, but I would like to listen from you some more specific aspect if you have some conclusions about the drug addiction, and that has to do with violence too. The pandillas, the mafias in Central America are growing up because of these drug addictions that are related to the traumas that the children are facing because of the isolation that you mentioned before.
So yes, for a growing number of countries, and here's a huge finding. For very poor countries in Africa, but also in Latin America, the largest source of foreign exchange has been now for 2 generations, the remittances that are repatriated by a very, very tiny number of immigrants overseas. Looking at the data, for example, from Germany, we did a project with the Bertelsmann Foundation in the Gütersloh. It's fantastic. There are tiny little African countries where a quarter of the GDP is repatriated by the workers in Europe. So this is what we mean by a transnationalism of the heart here. It's the lung and the heart of the countries. So this is very, very important. And I think it's also very, very important to lower the cost of sending money back and forth. So new technologies that are able to lower the rates by which immigrants are sending remittances back home is very, very significant, because this is these are hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that cross boundaries every day. So the question of the gangs. The gangs are a product of American history. Every wave of immigrant groups created their own gangs over time. This was true of the Irish. Everybody knows about the Italians because everybody read Puzo and so the Godfather. But this is true of every group. The Jews and the Irish and the Italians. Every group had its gangs, the Italians. The gangs in Central America originated in Los Angeles. Mara Salvatrucha, La Catorce, these are streets in Los Angeles. I was a dean at UCLA for 10 years. This is the world that is very, very well known. They were born in LA and then they were exported to Central America. It's also true of Cape Verde. It's also true of a large number of growing countries where the families come to the US. These dystopic structures that we try to outline in our research create marginalization and the emergence of gangs that are then transnational. What we see now in Central America is the alignment of what I call las tres caras de Herodes: human trafficking, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking. And they're all managed by the same cartels.
A couple of things that I think may be true that are relevant, but you're an expert and I'm not, so these may be false facts, and I want to raise them to see whether you think they're true or not. One is that I know from some work I've done that most Italians who immigrated to the United States in the high period of Italian migration at the turn of the 19th and early 20th centuries did not stay migrants. They mostly returned to America. It was a kind of a pendular, temporary period, and they returned as rich Americans. They were called rich Americans in the southern villages of this country when they returned. My impression is that's no longer true. That is, that most migrants, at least in the United States, stay in the United States. Of course, many don't, but that I think there's been a change in the composition of migration. If that's true, then that it's only accentuates the trends that you've been that you earlier talked about. You talked about this rapidly growing fraction of immigration as a fraction of all population in America, and at a different level. The trend is the same elsewhere in the rich world. A lot of Italians came and stayed, but even more Central Americans are going to come and stay, and so on. That's a question. Is it a fact that am I right that changed? You want to answer that before I get to the second question?
Yes. Went to Buenos Aires, went back to Spain, 40%. Michael Piori at MIT wrote a book called The Birds of Passage. In the order of 40% of the Italians in Brooklyn, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, in Red Hook, went back to Italy. They were target earners. They came, they worked, they saved, they went back, they retired as rich Americans. So this is empirically true. The war on terror sealed the U.S. southern border and disrupted what was historically a pattern of target earning. Mexicans would come. Mexicans are by far the largest group of immigrants in the United States, by far. They would come, they would earn, they would capitalize themselves, no access to credit in Mexico. they would go back to they would go back to their countries. The war on terror and the sealing of the U.S. southern border disrupted what had been an arrangement for about half a century. And that created a very, very different new dynamic, a much more permanent settlement on the U.S. side of the border.
My second factoid may be true or not true. My observation in work that we have done on diversity and migration and so on suggests that immigration, as a general rule, is socially isolating, and that there's an optical illusion. Native Americans watching immigrants from Latin America, but the same thing would be true for Africa or whatever, watch that, they see them playing soccer on a field, and they think, oh, those Latin Americans, they've got lots of social capital, lots of social connections that sustain them. But I've seen the same phenomenon in Scandinavia too, actually, of groups of immigrants that get together and make it seem to the natives as if there's a bunch of social connection, a bunch of social capital among those immigrants. But that actually that's an optical illusion, because the process of migration itself has destroyed many of the ties that kept people going in their home country. So when you move from southern Italy to the north end of Boston, of course you move to a block on the north end where many people from your village came, but that wasn't. That was a mark of how much they'd lost, because they still had most of their friends and most of their family and most of their connections, their social capital, back home, and their church was back home. And of course, efforts were made to minimize that hit. But it would be, the reason that I make this point, if it's true, it may not be true. You may know better data. But if it's true that the process of immigration is socially isolating, then that re-emphasizes a point I was trying to make earlier in my remarks, that we have to worry about, the most important thing I think we have to worry about less well-off kids of all sorts, but including especially immigrants, is loneliness, being alone. Solitude is a devastating feature. We're meant to be connected with other people. And so that's my question is immigration likely to exacerbate that problem of increasing isolation, especially of kids?
So, thank you, Bob. It's fundamentally, and as you were speaking in your presentation earlier today, what came to mind is how dimorphic these formations are. For immigrant origin children in the United States today, it is the best of times, it is the worst of times. It's what sometimes we call, in a jocular way, Princeton, prison, Yale, jail. Never in the history of the United States, ever, have so many immigrant origin children moved up so fast. I used to teach a course, a large course in the college with 200 or 300 kids. Yeah, the Harvard College, right. And 2/3 of the kids would raise their hands. They came from immigrant origin homes. That had not been the case 100 years ago at Harvard with the children of the Italian, the Sicilians in the North End. So, so in some ways, things are better than ever for the immigrant journey. In other ways, things are quite dystopic. And that's maybe the most important finding of this long-term, very, very involved longitudinal study. I do want to outline a good news story here, which is in the United States, what we used to call balkanization, as somebody put it, was defeated is defeated in the bedroom. Because immigrants in the US, the momentum, the demographic momentum is toward exogamy. This was true of the Jews of the Lower East Side. Nat Glaser wrote that up. This is true of the Asians today. An Asian woman today in Los Angeles is more likely to marry outside her group than inside her group. So in the US, the exogamic principle has been a major engine of disrupting what is otherwise isolating and segregating. The counter story to that, which goes back to the question Gustavo asked, is something extraordinarily counterintuitive. Immigrants are healthier than the non-immigrant counterparts when they arrive. This is the so-called healthy immigrant paradox. I don't know, 30 years ago, I was giving, Arthur Kleinman sent me the data from a panel study of the National Science Academy, the National Academy of Sciences, and the data were stunning. Mexican women who are poorer, have less literacy, have healthier babies than their Chicana, US-born, fully legal, more educated sisters. Sorry.
We have two questions left. Marcelo, behave. Okay. We have two questions left, but probably you just formulate your questions now, and then he will answer in the general time for discussion, because there is no time.
Okay, well, congratulations, Marcelo. Very good presentation as usual. I'd like just to build a little bit on the case of the kids of migrants that become more susceptible to be part of gangs in Los Angeles. And taking a Latin American view, the war on drugs has been largely a failure. And drug trafficking is becoming more and more of a problem in places that one would not expect, like the Amazon. Now it's become a big, big problem in the Amazon. And now we are having migration from Venezuela to Brazil, very large migration. And we're in the early stages, so maybe in a way we could learn from your experience, Mexico, US. And my question to you, would it make sense to call for a different kind of war on drugs that would be centered on people and family and kids with a sort of a long-term view? So instead of having a conventional approach of what has not worked, look at how to prevent or how not to create the objective circumstances to develop gangs as a result of children that don't have a good life.
Jutta?
Thank you for this very brilliant talk. Actually, I learned a lot, and I want to learn more. And as you know, we receive hundreds of Ukrainian children day by day in Berlin. And I'm daily at the station, and I try to help, and my institute tries to help. So what would your advice be? What do we do with those unaccompanied young children, or the best of them?
I'm sorry, but we have to move on to the next speaker, and then we will recover these two questions and their answers.